Oh, yes.
Somebody screaming obscenities at me at the airport.
Yep. We're going to have a big sign and...
Oh man, what did we sign up for?
We'll just be crossing the street in Portland and somebody will be screaming obscenities at us again and be just like, man, this guy is just...
Oh no, I have actually told all 300 people that I know what you look like, and they're all going to try and crack jokes and get you to laugh. That's their new goal in life.
Man from Lang, my wife is like, what is Man from Lang's real name? I always hear you, because Nathan and I are talking, and we'll talk about you, and we'll call you Man from Lang. And she's like, you guys always just call him Man from Lang. Like, what is his real name?
He doesn't have a real name. That's his actual name.
Yeah, literally. Have you not seen the artwork?
Well, speaking of artwork, welcome everyone to another episode of Beyond the Veil, the series on the great old ones where we interview writers, game designers, artists, and other prominent members of the community of the Cthulhu gaming world. And today we are joined by a man whose career is a bit of a melange of all of these things. He currently works as a writer and artist for Delta Green and Arc Dream Publishing. Dennis Detwiller, welcome.
Hi, how you guys doing?
Welcome, Dennis. Is it Detwiller or Detweiler?
Oh, you know, we're easy on that front. It's usually Detwiller, but I've heard Detweiler, and it's spelled like 33 different ways. But we're all related. You find a Detwiller or a Detweiler or a one L. That's us too.
I was about to say I grew up in Peoria, Illinois, and it was Detweiler Park, so it's going to be hard to switch it.
Yeah, no, that's our family.
So thank you for coming on, Dennis. It's very awesome for you to join us.
No problem.
I wanted to ask you briefly about how you got started in gaming.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I grew up in New York City. I was a professional artist from when I was about 15 or 16. So I did art for Marvel and DC and stuff like that. And then got a scholarship to go to art school. And while in art school, I dated a woman who lived in New Brunswick, New Jersey. And I would take the train out there. And one day I wandered into a gaming store and I saw The Unspeakable Oath, issue 3 of The Unspeakable Oath. And I thought, wow, this is awesome. And I immediately wrote them and said, I want to do art. And that's kind of that's my first gaming job. But I've been playing role-playing games since 1978, I want to say, with D&D, and Call of Cthulhu in 1985. So yeah, I mean, I loved it for a long time, and then I saw Way In, and I'm really glad I took that jump and bugged John Tynes.
I read on Wikipedia, the most trusted source on the internet, that you volunteered initially for the job.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be clear, yeah, The Unspeakable Oath was, a no money operation. It's very different than now. Like, seriously, now, if I wanted to put out an entire 128-page gaming book, I could do everything myself and press a button, and there'd be a POD copy of it in my mailbox in 2 weeks. But in 1991, it was like 5 people to put together a zine, and then you had to staple it and all this other kind of stuff. It took forever. The computer tech just wasn't there.
So how did you come into the world of Lovecraft?
Oh, I read, I think the first horror novel I ever read was Salem's Lot when I was about 9 or 10. And it mentioned, it has some Lovecraftian mentions in there, and then King mentions it in the foreword. So I picked up the original Del Rey black and white cover with the red highlight, cool paint with Stephen Whalen paintings that were just awesome. At the Mountains of Madness, and I read At the Mountains of Madness, and I was like, "This is it. This is what I want to do. I don't know how, but I'm going to make this a thing I do." And I absorbed everything Lovecraft wrote. And I have to say, I know a lot of people disagree with me. I'm not a huge fan of his writing. I'm a huge fan of his conceptualization and his ideas. His writing is somewhat stulted, I'll say.
Yeah, I would agree, especially his earlier works.
Yeah. It's quite clear he's having a rough time kind of getting across what he wants, but his concepts are so strong that they're still around today, and his name is still associated with them. So he did something right.
Definitely. So then after you went to volunteer for this Unspeakable Oath, you moved. Was it to Washington for the Pagan House?
No. So the first thing I did was, I was running out of money in New York. So living as a freelance artist in New York was not an easy thing to do. So what I did was I packed up everything and moved to Columbia, Missouri, which is where Pagan Publishing was at the time. John was still going to college, I think. So it was John, Blair Reynolds, Chris Klepak, John Crow, Brian Appleton, all the classic Pagan heads. And we all lived in a house, basically, and ran Pagan Publishing and did, books like The Golden Dawn and Walker in the Wastes and stuff like that. But what I found was being paid New York wages for art and living in Missouri, I could live there forever. I could literally eat out every night and be fine. Cover my rent. It was like, in Columbia, Missouri, it was like pennies on the dollar to New York. So I really liked it. But then Wizards of the Coast kind of blew up. And I had started doing magic cards for them, painting them, before magic was even a thing. It's basically... they were friends of ours, and I did all this stuff as a favor, and suddenly it started paying really well. So they invited us all out to Washington and basically said, if you move out to Washington, you can have a job. So me and John and pretty much all the other pagans loaded up a truck and went out to Seattle.
Wow, that's really cool, because that was the first mention of your name that I had seen was playing Magic when I was a kid.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I remember there was one card that you had drawn, or you had done art for, that was like a lycanthrope, where it was like a guy's... Oh, God, that was so cool.
Yeah, Greater Werewolf. Yeah, that was... Yep. Oh, thanks. Yeah, it was fun. And those cards, paid for my first house. Those cards were amazing. Wizards was an incredible company, and their royalty scheme and the way they paid the artists was just great back then.
So you moved to Washington and started kind of doing work for Wizards of the Coast with the rest of Pagan Publishing. So what happened? What happened from there? Well,
me and John and first John and Unspeakable Oath 7. John said, "Oh, I have this idea for." I gotta go back. We used to play Mask of Nyarlathotep, and we'd die all the time, right?
Of course.
Like our characters would just get smoked continuously, and you'd have to bring in a new character, and you'd have to have some reason to bring in that new character. And it got to the point where we were literally recruiting like waiters out of street cafes in Mask of Nyarlathotep and Cairo, like, you want to come fight a dark cult with us, waiter? Because we couldn't come up with a good story. So John was like, I'm going to make this government conspiracy that can replace agents. If you die hunting Nyarlathotep, they're going to send 2 more in or whatever. And that's where Delta Green kind of came from. And he came up with it in Unspeakable Oath 7, I think. And from there, I just went ape. I started writing up a bunch of UFO stuff. Because I love UFO stuff, and I have since the 70s. Scott Glancy was kind of a pen pal, and he's a government guy. So he started writing up kind of real-world history, and we started putting that all together. That's the Pagan House, as it was known in Seattle. We all just worked a day job mostly, and then at night or in the afternoons, whenever we had free time, we'd work on Delta Green and other bigger books like Realm of Shadows and things like that. I think Ken Hite called us, it was a frat house for serial killers, was a decent description.
I heard everybody had a gun in the Pagan House, and more than one.
Not
gun.
Me.
Not you?
I was unarmed. Yeah, I was fully unarmed the entire time. But, I never felt wanting. I could have run into any room and grabbed half a dozen firearms. No problem.
I heard Blair would walk around inside the house with a holster on.
That's totally true. Yeah, Blair is Blair, right? He had his own. He marched to his own drum. He lived with us in the 3rd Pagan House in Seattle for a bit. So we lived on 49th Street near a pub, which is where Delta Green was kind of born. We sat in the pub and yelled at each other and came up with the layout and the design. And then we moved into the basement of the place across the street from one of Ted Bundy's victims. That's why it was super famous, is the sorority house was like 50 feet from us. And then we moved to the Gray House, where Scott still lives, I think. And that's where everybody kind of got together. Scott moved in, Blair, John, me, John Crow. Yeah. Crazy.
Fantastic. Hey, Dennis, just real quick. I know we had covered this and then ran from it like someone looking into the maw of chaos. Just real quick, what are your views on cooking unicorns? Do you have any?
Well, I still get hate mail about. I painted a card called Feast of the Unicorn. Well,
okay, thank you. That was Doppelganger Check Part 2. You're good. You're good. We're good.
Yeah, I still get hate mail.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a little
you guys
weird.
Came up with.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. You guys came up with an awesome concept with Delta Green. It's quickly become... I didn't really learn about it until recently, but it's quickly become my favorite role-playing game.
Oh, thanks.
So great work with that.
Thank you.
So you created the Night Floors. Can you tell us a little bit about that, how that came about?
Yeah. John was writing this amazingly cool Haster Mythos chapter for Delta Green Countdown. And Delta Green Countdown was the follow-up to the original Delta Green book. And it became this monstrous nightmare book that took 6 or 7 years to finish. And that just means I had a lot of these manuscripts floating around. So when I read John's chapter, I was like, oh, I'm going to write a scenario for this. And I wrote a scenario that would upset people in a surreal way, not in a, the monster launches out of the wall and gobbles everybody up, Lovecraftian way. And I knew I had won when I ran it for the group. I ran it for John and Blair Reynolds and John Crow. And Blair Reynolds got so upset, he just stood up and walked away from the table at one point. He was just like, nope. He got all freaked out, and he left the room, and then he came back later and said, is that bullshit over? Is that... And I was like, yeah, for now, and he sat down and played for a little bit more, and then he got upset again and kept getting creeped out. And I was like, okay, I'm doing well. I'm creeping Blair out. That's a gold star for me. And I think specifically it was in a portion of the scenario, there's a small bathroom, and you see a man carrying a suitcase walk horizontally through the bathroom, which doesn't have space for him to walk at a brisk pace. And I just described that, and Blair was like, fuck this, I'm leaving. He got really creeped out. He was into that Shining kind of, I love the Shining surreal feel. So I wrote Night Floors to be that. And my new campaign, the first campaign for Delta Green really, is called Impossible Landscapes, and it's built around Night Floors is the first scenario. There are 5 scenarios. And they're all interconnected. It's Delta Green versus the King in Yellow, and it's very, very weird and dark and huge. It's about the size of the Handler's Guide.
Yeah, the Handler's Guide is huge. Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah. For reference, it's about 500-ish pages.
No, I don't know. I couldn't tell you. Me and Shane blacked out somewhere in the 220-page range. But
who orchestrated this get together with Dennis? By the way, who's the one who contacted him and asked if he wanted to be on the show?
Oh, I don't know.
I believe
because we're not worthy. Does everybody realize that? I just want to point that out.
This is fun. I'm having a.
I'm just the demon in the room. Okay, I'm just saying.
It's a good way to start the Mondays. So.
Well, I understand from Dennis that if this podcast of ours is to go anywhere, we all need to move to Portland and live in one house together. So
yeah, well, actually, that I will say that really helped. That really did help. We hated each other at certain points. I think the first year we forgot to get heating oil for the house, so it was pretty much like the thing.
Oh my god!
You'd come home and you'd see plumes of smoke from everybody's breath, and they're all wearing giant parkas, and you're all ready.
And flamethrowers, and dogs are dead, and
it was totally. It was no one trusts each other anymore. Yeah, it was very much like that. So yeah, that living together breeds some really odd interactions, and it gives birth to some really cool shit.
I feel you. I'm married.
Yeah, me too. But with John, me and John Tynes, we used to just shoot the shit from midnight to 2 a.m, And some of the coolest Delta Green shit just rose out of us bouncing ideas off each other. So yeah, it helps.
I heard about a tub of rice vinegar water that you guys found that had turned like brownish or yellowish.
Oh yeah.
You guys had to go take to the dump.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a lot of craziness. I mean, we had I'm trying to think of some of the stories. We had the beer fridge. We had Spooge the cat. You guys don't know about Spooge?
No.
Go on.
We had a giant Maine Coon cat that came with us from Missouri, John's cat, Spoogehead, and we loved this cat. He was awesome. He used to sit on the couch like a person. Like I came in one day and Maine Coon are like giant cats. So he was just propped up on the couch, sitting like a person with his arm on the armrest, watching television. Like the TV was on, and when I came in the door, he turned around to like look who came in the door, and he was like, "Hey," and then went back to watching television. And I just left him there, like it was totally normal. And he lived there. I think he died in the house when he was, I don't know, 6 or 7. But just a great cat. We had Glancy had a half dozen other cats. The place always stunk like cat pee. There were pistols everywhere. It was a weird place.
Was this the inspiration for Operation Night Floors? This actual scenario?
I don't know. I couldn't really say at that time. Most of Night Floors, the inspiration for Night Floors for me is I grew up in New York City in the 70s, and it's just not a nice place. It's still not a nice place. It's a weird place. It eats people up. And I grew up in a lot of high rises, a lot of over-painted stairwells with bad lighting, a lot of endless cubbyhole like basements and apartment buildings you rent. And I just find those places really creepy. So that's kind of what I wanted to write.
So we did a playthrough of Night Floors for the podcast, and we just released the second episode today.
Oh, cool.
Out of 3 episodes.
Nice.
And yeah, it was such a great adventure. I had to run it again for my regular RPG gaming group, and it played so different both times. I mean, there's so many different little things.
It's an unusual scenario. So whenever I write a Lovecraftian scenario, I'm always trying to figure out what kind of novel thing can I bring to it. And for Night Floors, most of the time when you write a Lovecraftian scenario, you're searching for the bugaboo, and when you find it, it tries to eat you, and you come to some resolution. You flee, you bury it, you put the elder sign on its crypt, but Night Floors, what I wanted was a very open-ended, very a scare fest. Put you in the monster and you see it, and it's about getting out of the monster. It felt unique when I was writing it at the time. It was quite a bit of fun.
So did you start with Night Floors and then wanted to expand on the King in Yellow for Delta Green, or was it just kind of like you had pieced together scenarios previously written?
Oh no. So when I wrote Night Floors, I originally envisioned it continuing forward, because one of the elements of the King in Yellow is I don't want to ruin anything for anybody at home, but Impossible Landscapes. The King Yellow mythos is a very different thing than the Lovecraftian mythos. But the idea is once you're touched, there's really no escape. It's always part of your life. It's not a physical threat. It's almost a hovering, surreal disintegration of your world that goes on and on and on. And it can go slower,
almost.
Or it can go faster.
Well, it's like Freddy Krueger, right? I mean, in the Nightmare on Elm Street, it's a perpetual mind screw.
Yeah, you're kind of infected, and so I had already written notes for the follow-up scenario. I don't know, 15 years ago, and I just kind of went back to it, and it kind of just laid itself all out there. Now it's all based on John Tyne's chapter called "The Hastard Mythos" in Delta Green Countdown, and he wrote kind of a breakdown. He said, here's an idea for a King Yellow campaign, and he wrote maybe 10 paragraphs on kind of here's the structure without any of the real kind of meat on how to run it. And I was like, Night Floors was written to start that. Now I need to carry the players completely through to Carcosa and everything beyond. And I'm writing it for 2.5 years, and it takes forever to get it just right. because it's this weird recursive, almost fractal of horror. Things reflect back on each other, and so I wrote a volume of Secret Faces, the follow-up scenario, which is, I'll give you the premise. 20 years after the Night Floors, the agents are reactivated because at a Delta Green friendly psychiatric private facility where they stick agents who go mad. 4 agents had vanished, inscribing the yellow sign on the wall before they vanished, and they don't want to expose anyone new, so they reactivate those who survived the Night Floors and send them into this psychiatric clinic to kind of figure out where these people went. So that's kind of the setup, and from there it's, it goes far and deep. And there's several other scenarios in the book, and they're all interconnected. And if you run it beginning to end, it's, perhaps a couple months of play. I'm really excited. I've run it twice, and both times have gone in very different directions.
Yeah, Dennis. What sort of advice would you give someone who is interested in writing their own scenarios? I know that you must have some sort of creative process you go through when you sit down to put together these things. What would you recommend for a keeper like myself?
Yeah. It's usually the way I write these things is I work back from what are the cool points, what are the bits of horror I want to show, what are the monster types I'm excited to kind of showcase. So I'll come up, I'll usually have a vision in my head of 1 or 2 sequences that are representative. So, for example, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the scenario called Artifact Zero that I did for Delta Green.
I've heard of it. I haven't.
So, this won't ruin the scenario for anybody, but basically Artifact Zero is about an archaeologist in Montana who is excavating a big site because they found some erratics in the ground, and erratics are odd artifacts that are out of kind of their time placement in the geologic shape of the Earth. For example, finding, an arrowhead in 10 million year old schist or something like that. He's digging it up, and what he finds is his own skeleton 11.5 million years ago with a smashed titanium watch that's smeared in the rock. And, his skeleton is fossilized. It has all the fillings. And that's the beginning of the scenario, is he digs himself up, basically. And I had that moment in my head, and I was like, okay, now how do I tie this to Delta Green, to Majestic, to, and I worked back from that. But the other really useful thing are mind mapping tools. So little bubble, you put a little bubble and you connect it with a line. A lot of computers have these mind map tools. I use those extensively to kind of map out where the clues lead. And the last thing I'll say is I try and make as many interconnections as possible, no matter how obscure they might be, between clues, because players often will miss like the giant highway of like, you should go this way. They'll just completely bypass that, like you have the guy in the house who has the weird colored eyes who's chanting every night, and they're like, let's follow the paper boy. That's a classic player move. So adding in as many interconnections as possible with good reason. I mean, don't just add them in. They have to make sense. But try and find as many as you can. That's my highest level advice. And then the last thing I'll say is start small and try and complete something front to back. So say do a little scenario like a 10-page, here's the threat, here's what the guy's doing, here's their location, here's how to disrupt it, the end. Don't try and go into a campaign first, you know what I mean? Try and start out in fits and starts. It's almost like writing a short story before you write a novel.
Yeah, I've been working on a couple of Cthulhu-like scenarios for my D&D group, so it's I've encountered that myself, trying to figure out how you get from point A to point B to point C in the most sort of efficient but I guess somewhat logical manner.
Yeah, it's tough, and like I said, players sometimes won't see the thing that you think is blindingly obvious. Sometimes it's not as obvious as you think it is, So finding a lot of different ways in is is kind of key.
Yeah. I've noticed that even just in some of the short scenarios we've played, where the obvious clues are the ones they miss, and then they're off on some tangent, and then you're like, oh, now I've got to somehow bring them back, and yeah. So where would you recommend, like a Delta Green noob like myself, where would you recommend that someone like myself would begin?
Well, we have a really cool product that's pay what you want, which is, basically means free on Drive-Thru RPG. You can literally just type in 0 and get it for free. And it has it's called Need to Know, Delta Green Need to Know, and it has the basics of the rules. It has an entire scenario, and it has 6 agents pre-made, and you can just sit down and play. You don't need any of the other books or anything like that. And the scenario is nice and creepy and simple, and it kind of demonstrates what Delta Green's about. So I would recommend there to begin with. And like I said, free to play, and I'll give you the link so maybe you can put it up, and anybody can check it out. But yeah, that's a great place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. That link will definitely be available in the show notes. But to go back on the history of you and Delta Green, as we know now, Pagan Publishing is no more, but Delta Green eventually lived on with Arc Dream Publishing. In a previous episode, we actually had the chance to interview Shane, and we got his perspective, but I'm curious, what's your side of the story, Dennis?
Well, I've always loved Delta Green. It's one of my favorite creations. Me, John, and Scott really kind of bled to get it to where it was. And I always felt it was a real shame it was kind of left behind. And, the other thing I'd always hear, which really kind of irked me, to be honest, is, Delta Green could never survive in the modern era with a cell phone. And I'm like, Jesus, people, don't you read Lovecraft? Like, At the Mountains of Madness, what is the main, he's flying around in a triplane with a radio in Antarctica, like they're cutting edge modern Lovecraft, his protagonists are running around with the best of the best of 1920s technology. And it makes no difference in the face of the great old ones. I mean, so that's kind of what I wanted to do with Delta Green. I wanted to bring it up to the modern era. I wanted to revive it. I wanted to see how far it could go, because I felt like gaming had shifted and I wasn't sure. And when I mean shifted, I mean it had shifted. In the 90s, we'd struggle 7 years to release a book, and then distributors would take all of our money, take all of our books, and never pay us. We literally made nothing off of Delta Green and Delta Green Countdown, or very, very little. And Kickstarter and Patreon have really shifted that. So when I was still in video games, I said, me and Shane basically said, okay, we're going to redo Delta Green as its own kind of standalone, because we feel it's deviating from Call of Cthulhu enough. Call of Cthulhu has become much more about heroic point spend, save the world kind of stuff. And Delta Green is much more about the horrific costs on your humanity of even knowing about these things. So we wanted to build in things like lethality and the new sanity system. With bonds, we felt that reflected much more of what the game should be. So we put it together, and I did it in video games. I was in video games, and I was working on this thing on the side, and I was thinking, it'll go to Kickstarter, and it won't do very much. And it just exploded on Kickstarter. Went on Kickstarter and just blew the doors off, and was just amazing. And I was like, wow, there's a huge call for this. And so I just slowly set about reorienting my life so that this would be my full-time thing, because obviously the interest was there. And that took a couple of years, but now we're here, and it's been, a good 3 years that I've been working on this stuff full-time, and it's amazing.
Yeah, it's really quite an incredible story to see the resurgence of this, almost now, 25-year RPG.
Yeah, it's old. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we always hear, whenever we talk to pros or anything who have worked on games, they always have kind words to say about Delta Green. And Delta Green, the original 96, 97 Delta Green, tops the RPG.net list of best games. It's out of 18,000. It's the number 1 rated. And Countdown is number 2, I think. And that's always great to see. But at the time, it was difficult to eat praise. We had no food, we had no money, and there was no way to keep going. So today, to see the fans kind of really gather around it, really kind of push it forward, is just great. It just makes me so
Oh,
happy.
it makes us happy that you're able to provide us with great games to play. So, Dennis, what's kind of your process for creating art for Delta Green? Do you kind of like have a scene in your head that you want it depicted, or does it kind of come from the writing itself?
Well, so I'm I did book covers and comic books, and studied professional illustration. So everything is really classical. And what a lot of people don't understand is that pro illustrators, like book covers and things you see, the old D&D book covers, they're all photo sourced. People take a photo, they grid off the photo sometimes they can just eyeball sketch it, but they're always referencing some source. And usually the Delta Green images are, a half dozen reference images that I sketch together and then paint in oil. And that, it takes quite a while. But, overall, I usually have an idea in mind from the get-go of something creepy or something off that I want people to feel when they look at the image. That's basically what illustration is you're trying to immediately transport someone to feel something you are kind of handing over in just this picture. Loneliness, detachment, fear, apprehensiveness, confusion. You're trying to kind of immediately transmit this silently, and that's always my goal, is to do something with Delta Green. It's always something off, it's always something weird, it's always something upsetting.
You mean it's always a creepy baby on the cover art?
yeah there's a lot of creepy babies, sure, but I think they're well deserved. I love the baby.
Oh man.
That could be taken out of context.
That's okay. They can't prove anything.
Yeah, I love your art. I think it really gives it that last needed thing that completes the feeling of the scenarios for Delta Green. Did you do the cover for the Labyrinth?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, that one's really just outstanding. I love that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I did all the art for Delta Green all together. So every book, and this is something else that wouldn't be possible previously. It's something I always wanted to do, but couldn't really afford to do it. And a lot of game books, the reason they look so haphazard and strange is you have 15 artists doing stuff, and the art director can only wrangle so much. So you don't get a consistent look, and I hate that. So with Delta Green, I had a very clear look. This photorealistic, messy paint stuff. And that's kind of what I want to get across. So, I love painting. But, most of the time I'm writing or designing. So it's quite nice to take a break and paint.
Have you ever considered maybe doing a Delta Green movie? I know Adam Scott Glancy recently tried, and unfortunately the Kickstarter, it wasn't funded in time. But is that something that you'd be interested for the future?
Well, the Delta Green property has always been optioned since its birth. So originally, the first option was by Gail Ann Hurd, who was co-producer and co-writer of The Terminator and The Walking Dead and such. And that went nowhere. It was pitched in Hollywood, and is currently being pitched in Hollywood, and has been continuously for 10 years. So, not holding my breath. But it does seem like it should be happening. Lovecraft has taken a swing towards the more popular. A lot of stuff's just not very good, There's a lot of horror out there that's just eh. And TV seems to be an endless open maw for ongoing, content. So having a new horror series that would be dark and evil, I think I described it as the X-Files, except every episode Mulder and Scully are dead, and you have to come find them. It's just a new Mulder and Scully.
I'd watch that. To be fair,
yeah, I'd love to see that. So yeah, I mean, the answer is we've always considered it. It's always been actively pitched for both video games and movies and TV. It has gained some traction in the last couple of years, so you never know. But
well, Dennis, on the subject of video games and Lovecraft, I feel that a lot of games centered around the Lovecraft mythos kind of miss the point of the Lovecraft mythos. What are your feelings about that?
They definitely do. So much so I've never, and I've played games extensively, as you can imagine. 15 years in video games. I've played every Lovecraftian game that's come out, and Eternal Darkness is probably the closest I've ever seen to a semi-Lovecraft game. But even the things that they call Cthulhu, the more recent games are just shooters. They don't know what to do with Lovecraft, and the answer is the reason they have such a hard time with it is there are no win conditions in Lovecraft. You cannot win.
Right.
And Delta Green, that's why we moved all the metering in Delta Green. The win condition is you are sane.
Yeah, you survive.
You survived, and your family is not damaged. That's it. And to every video game designer, the win condition is I killed the big squid thing. They can't help but think that.
Yeah. Do you think that's a problem with video games as a medium? As like you're you're meant to be more empowered when playing a video game?
No. And in fact, I think if you built a truly Lovecraftian experience in, say, I worked at a company called Harebrained Schemes, and they did Shadowrun, the point and click Shadowrun games, Shadowrun Dragonfall.
I missed those games.
Yeah, they're really cool games. If they did a Lovecraftian game, it would be good. It's a story-based game. It's about personal degeneration and changing and that kind of stuff. It can't be I have this pistol, and then I have a semi-automatic pistol, and then I have a submachine gun, and then I have a bazooka, and I'm fighting Cthulhu now. And that's the default. It's not really video games' fault. It's more the market is crying for it, and a lot of designers will listen to the market. Not what they should be building, based on their gut.
I know one of our co-hosts, Man from Ling, has been streaming a recent Lovecraftian game, and he said that the tentacles are, and the entire game is just right in your face with the tentacles and just the blatant.
Yeah, it's no fun. I mean, what you want is 90 minutes of tension and 8 minutes of solid terror. You don't want 90 minutes of monsters and 8 minutes of sitting in a room selecting boxes to find clues. And it's completely reversed. What they do. And I've played. There've been a couple there've been 2 Cthulhu branded releases in the last 10 years, and people really liked the last one, and I just didn't.
Yeah, I have to agree. It just misses the whole point of being being completely helpless, which is kind of the whole point of a Lovecraftian experience.
Yeah. Without the core of humanity is essentially useless. It's not a Lovecraftian joint, and that's kind of where all these games fall short. I mean, like Alien Isolation is a great example of the concept, the core concept of Lovecraftianism is there, but then it falls apart. It's all about how do I win. More weapons, more places, more tricks, more traps, and that's not what it should be about. And it's really hard. I mean, building a truly Lovecraftian video game would be an extremely difficult undertaking, but heck, it would be a lot of fun.
Yeah, I can imagine it would be difficult to say the least, because you have to get so many things right for it to feel Lovecraftian without it feeling frustrating.
Yeah. Have you ever played Torment? The Planescape.
It sounds familiar.
Oh, that's a classic.
Yeah, I played it years ago.
Yeah, it's an old point and click game. Much more like that. It would have to be story based. It would have to be very rich in branching paths. Characters would have to kind of slowly fall into insanity and change, and it's very, very difficult to imagine. But it's certainly possible. So
you talked a little bit about Lovecraft's resurgence in lately, and I mean I've seen it in video games and books, and whenever I go to the bookstore there seems to be new Lovecraft editions there. And then we've had the I think it was the Sinking City, and then recently they released Stygian came out recently, but it seems like every time they talk about Lovecraft now, they can't seem to avoid talking about his racism either. Is that how do you feel about that? Like, personally, I just sort of, I'm like, he was a racist, yes, but that doesn't it doesn't negate everything that he's done or the atmosphere that he created.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a couple different ways I usually respond to that. I mean, one, he was an absolute racist beyond all belief. Like, he's not a human being I would like to associate with. He's a pretty horrible person on a lot of different fronts. I read all of his letters. I understand everything pretty much published about him. He's not a nice guy. He's a misanthrope. He was, he was a self-directed outsider who hated everybody, basically. There's a couple things I always caveat. I say up front, like, people will get really upset about Lovecraft dealing with, say, the people from Pohnpei, and implying that people who worship the Great Old Ones are always subhuman and this kind of stuff. And what I usually say to that is, Lovecraft, ironically, Lovecraft undermined everything. Western science, white European science is useless in the face of anything he created. So he kind of undermined himself. Which I really love. And the horrors of Innsmouth are white people horrors. They're degenerate, horrible alien interbreeding, terrible creatures from beneath the sea, but they're New Englanders. They're it's this crazy thing. But the other thing I'll say is, Lovecraft never made a penny off of any of his more horrible ideas or even his good ideas. He died penniless and never really significantly made anything in his life from any of this work. So it's not like we're rewarding him now by enjoying the concept of a Lovecraftian universe. And then the last thing I'll say is that the concept of Lovecraftian universe is just associated with him. It existed long before him. Arthur Machen and other writers wrote about an uncaring maw of existence that just gobbles up everything long before Lovecraft. Lovecraft just kind of absorbed it, and then the real shtick for Lovecraft was he wrote a bunch of his friends and said, let's all share this. That's it. That's his big contribution.
Yeah, he was just an organizer and a hype man, really.
He was. He liked writing letters, and he got a lot of people together, and they all started writing short stories that kind of shared similar elements, like the Necronomicon, but the biggest thing I'll say, above all, is Lovecraft was an awful, awful person, and the best way to kind of come to grips with his creations is to see how well they're being used today to kind of undo any of the horrors he really was for. I mean, there's a huge push in diversity everywhere, in gaming and writing, and women and people of color writing these things are commonplace today. And like I said, it's not like if you write a Lovecraftian story or something with Cthulhu, some white supremacist somewhere gets a nickel. It's not like that. His stuff is open and has been co-opted by the right people. And that makes me happy, and it's kind of a nice little dance on his grave kind of situation, because in all honesty, he's not when you read his letters, he's a pretty awful person.
Yeah, no, I really appreciate, I mean, I think you raise a lot of good points. I guess my concern is that it's like, I think it was the review of Stygian was the one where it really stood out to me, where it was just like, it seemed like the whole review just hinged on that, on the Lovecraft as a racist, without any of the context that you've just provided, and I fear that that's the sort of thing that will stick in people's minds when they read these things. They'll just be like, oh, okay, well, now I can just dismiss it out of hand without understanding the context behind it, or how modern society has really subverted a lot of the ideas that he espoused.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah. I mean, there's a couple ways to look at this. There will always be people who, tend to kind of put things in a box and fire it into the sun, as I say, just because it upsets them, and they kind of want to, they want to spread that point of view. There's really nothing to be done there. You just have to kind of go, well, that's what you think, and I'm going to keep doing this. We've gotten some hate mail for, Delta Green in the past, and I've always found it very confusing because it's, a lot of the stuff we're writing in Delta Green is factual history.
Yeah.
Like absurdly factual. And, we'll get complaints about like, well, the Hmong people didn't do this, and like, yes, they did, and here's the reference, and here's the book on army tactics in Vietnam that says this was, So, sometimes the arguments are very strange there, and then other times we'll literally say, like, the Cho Cho people are not people. They are not human. They have not been human for 10 centuries. They are a servitor race of the great old ones. If you took a genetic test, there'd be very little left in them that looked anything like a human. And then we make them into these horrible cultists, and people are like, how can you condemn an entire fictional people?
Yeah,
like,
well, what you call horrible, we call subservient, so...
right. Like, they're aliens. They're here to destroy the world, and...
you say destroy, and we say recreate.
yeah, but they'll say similar things about the deep ones. How can you condemn an entire people? And it's like, it's a story about alien creatures trying to, consume the world. And the people, it just won't click. So I guess my big thing there is engaging on that. If the person is, adversarial, there's really no point. It doesn't help anybody's situation. There's going to be no resolution. They've already kind of decided it's a thing. Even if you're very careful, it still comes up, I guess is my point. And Lovecraft was not careful at all. In fact, if anything, he was, openly provocative in his writing.
Well, I think so far the men from Leng have been relatively unscathed. So
again, not human.
That's right.
So, Dennis, we kind of chatted before we started recording about a Call of Cthulhu scenario that you had written set in the Dreamlands. Can you?
Oh, yeah. It's not really a scenario. It's a whole campaign. It's called The Sense of the Sleight of Hand Man, and it's available at arcdream.com. And it's basically your player characters begin as opium and heroin addicts in New York in the 1920s, and you're given a strange dose of opium and wake in new bodies in the Dreamlands. You kind of have to find your way out while you're hunted by some force in the Dreamlands that wants to consume you. And it was quite fun to write. I kickstarted in 2014, 2015, and it did really well. It was up for a Silver Annie for best writing.
Oh, nice.
I think. Didn't win. Yeah, too bad.
Do you have any plans to perhaps convert a campaign like that into Delta Green, or?
No, not. It's such a different feel that I think it fits really well with the Call of Cthulhu rules as they stand. Yeah, no. I mean, we have some plans for the Delta Green. The Dreamlands and Delta Green are very strange, and they're a thing we've been discussing at length, and they're nothing like the standard Dreamlands. And we have a lot of thoughts there, but it'll be its own book at some point in the future.
Very cool. Did you have any hands on the Fall of Delta Green project with Pelgrane Press, or?
Yeah. So Ken Height, Shane Ivey, and I wrote the history chapter for the Delta Green Handler's Guide. And then Ken basically went off and he wanted to make a game that was set back when Delta Green thought that they could bring this all under control. So the early 60s. They were just kind of like, well, yeah, sure, communism, we'll crush communism, and then we'll stop the great old ones, and then we'll go to the moon and, colonize the solar system. No problem. And it's a very different feeling. So Ken worked very hard on that, and, we reviewed and changed content and kind of worked with him on making it all line up. But basically, we wrote a lot of content together for the Handler's Guide, and that's where all this stuff kind of came from.
And did you do any of the art for Fall of Delta Green? No, that was through Pelgrane Press.
That's all Pelgrane. I was swamped doing the Handler's Guide at the time.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Yeah, but I love the way the layout of their book looks.
Yeah,
it's great.
Yeah, it is
we
great.
hired her. The woman who did the layout for that, Jen, she's doing all the props for Impossible Landscapes, the new King in Yellow campaign.
Very nice. Do you have any information that you can share about that campaign in terms of release date or anything like that?
Impossible Landscapes. There's a couple. Sorry, that was my email just beeped. There's a couple things to kind of go over. At Arc Dream, we suffer under the yoke of the pagan publishing. This book is not done until this book is done. That is our mantra. That is our life. It's carved in my forehead backwards, so I see it on the mirror every morning. So when these books are done, we know. We just wrapped John Tynes' Labyrinth, which is a new Delta Green book with a bunch of antagonists and protagonists for your Delta Green campaign. It's awesome. I love it. I finished the art. It's all ready for layout. It's being laid out now. Impossible Landscapes is in edit, which means Shane Ivey is crawling through it with a big red pen and making my life miserable. And then we will get together, just like we did on the Handler's Guide, and literally crawl line by line through the book, yelling at each other on voice chat until it's perfect. So when it'll be done, probably the manuscripts will be done by December. The art is almost done. So when the manuscript's done and the art is done, it will go to layout, and that's usually about a month. So, I'd expect to see it at the end of winter, something like that, maybe. Labyrinth will be much sooner. Labyrinth, the layout will be done in a week or two, and it will go to press shortly thereafter.
Very cool. And then you mentioned props for Impossible Landscapes?
Yeah, just player handouts. So invitations and the things you read in Night Floors, and you went, what is that he's describing? Those are all provided now as a piece of art that you can show your players.
Oh, nice. That's very cool. Yeah, that's kind of one thing that I've always not been disappointed with, but have wanted in Delta Green games is more handouts. So that's very cool.
Yeah. We're working really hard to kind of make sure that's the standard going forward. But it takes a lot of work.
Yeah, and it's really just basically the three of you, right?
As far as like who works on all this stuff every day, it's me and Shane. Everybody else is kind of brought in as needed. So Ken Haidt or Adam Glancy or Greg Stolte, they do very specific things, but it's me and Shane are on the at the front of the fire base every morning, picking people off, trying to crawl through the wire.
You guys are really transparent too, though, about your projects and like the process. You even give the fans a little pieces here and there. It's really neat to see the process as it happens. And I can't think of another game company that has that kind of transparency. You and Shane work on a ton of projects. I heard you guys are doing a 5e.
Yeah. Shane wrote these really cool 5e scenarios. Two of them are out right now, and they have a third one on the way. And they're just awesome. I've run them. They're really fun. It's very sword and sorcery, very Conan, Bronze Age type stuff. But it's awesome, and it's kind of like a reimagining without any mechanical changes of classic D&D monsters. So ghouls and doppelgangers, and it's really cool. I love what he did there. But that's more of a hobby. Delta Green is kind of more of the focus. But yeah, I love that.
But it's not Lovecraftian D&D stuff. It's
no, not really. I mean, there's some. We can't fully escape the Arc Dream feel.
Yeah, the first scenario in that campaign, Sea Demon's Gold, to kind of briefly summarize, there's a portion of that scenario where the players actually end up in an underwater city, it's really cool, and it's just for a first level scenario that's like a really vast undertaking between the difference of like go kill the rats in the basement or go step in the yawning portal or something like that.
Yeah, it's fun. It's and what I like about that one is it's much more of a interact with the undersea people as opposed to like kill everything and take their stuff.
Yeah, I really liked that. Like you actually get to like go into the city and talk to the various political leaders. It was really interesting.
Yeah, it's definitely Shane's really talented at that stuff, and I really like the direction he was taking with these books. And we don't know what we're going to do with them. We may just collect them all into one 128-page book and put it up for pre-order. As opposed to the little scenarios. It's hard to tell what's super profitable. They're doing well. They review well. But, there's nothing compared to Delta Green. Delta Green just kind of blows them out of the water. So our focus kind of has to be on Delta Green. But, it's fun to have hobbies on the side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And just kind of gives you a different outlet to,
Yeah, it feels very different. And speaking of which, we have another game that me and Shane helped create way back when called Godlike. I don't know if you know about it.
I've heard of it, yeah.
So it's
World War II or something.
Yeah, the shortest pitch I know is it's Saving Private Ryan meets X-Men. So you can lift a tank, but you're not bulletproof. You get your head blown off just like everybody else. So it's a very dark, very realistic superhero World War II game. And we may have another edition of that coming out since punching fascists has come back in style. So
you could get a very Hellboy experience playing that game. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a fun game. Really nice mechanics by Greg.
Yeah, speaking of meat and potatoes games for you guys recently also did WrestleNomicon as well.
Yeah, that was really fun. Yeah. So that's a Great Old Ones wrestling card game. Rob Heinzu designed it, and Shane and I wrote it, and Kirk Komoda, who's just this amazing artist, did all the really kick-ass art.
Yeah, the art is hilarious, if anyone hasn't seen it.
Yeah, it's really fun. It's beer and pretzels kind of wrestling game.
But
Tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah, very tongue-in-cheek. We also had a chance to discuss with Shane a little bit about Zero Sum, the Delta Green card game that you guys had kind of put on the back burner. Do you have any additional thoughts about that, Dennis?
I'd love to have time to do it. If we do it, it will be post Impossible Landscapes. The design for it was pretty straightforward, but it's a lot of work, testing and kind of art. But the whole idea of the card game was basically you put down a threat and then you have a bunch of options to kind of you're trying to draw loops. These cards have arrows on them that turn left, turn right, split into two, that kind of stuff. So you start with a threat and you try and draw a loop around to kind of close it off. You have agents in play to start playing these cards. You could lose agents and people could play together, and we had a decent idea of how it would run, but none of the balanced cards or anything like that. There's a lot of work ahead of us if we're going to do that. WrestleNomicon's done. It's going to press. So this one, Zero Sum, just kind of sat on the back burner. We'll see where it goes. But I still like the idea.
It was going to be a co-op card game?
Yeah. It basically, the design, you could play with up to 4 people at the same time. And they could take over investigations. It was all about... Basically, you're playing the full conspiracy. So you'd get a threat card like the Reaper of Souls would show up. You have to close this in 6 cards, or it breaks wider and you put down another threat. So you're always constantly putting agents in play and, putting cards in play like Surveillance Team or... it's in a book, and it's the guy reading Necronomicon, and you're just trying to kind of close these loops without it breaking wider. And every time you fail to close the loop in the number of cards, you put down another threat that has to be closed. So it's this kind of ever expanding infection of unnatural stuff was the generic idea.
So beyond Delta Green and the stuff that you do for Arc Dream Publishing, Dennis, are there any other personal projects that you take on if you have any free time left over in the day?
Yeah. So there's a couple things. So one thing is I'm in the midst of writing several books. This sounds really weird, saying it out loud. So I'm 115,000 words into a book called There Were Giants in Those Days, which is an examination of superhuman talents in World War II combat, which is written as if people flying and lifting tanks and stuff was completely boring and conventional by the time this book was written. So when you read it, it's, and then this guy could fly. But it's a historical examination of superhumans in World War II. It's based in the world of Godlike. and it's huge, and it's just getting bigger. So every time I get bored doing what I'm doing, I go over that and write some more. And I have 2 other books that are underway. One is called Panopticon, which is a weird futuristic novel, and the other is a horror novel based on a short story I wrote called Lithic, which is a weird Lovecraftian tale, and that's getting pretty big now. That's in the 30 or 40,000 word range. Panopticon somewhere in the 55,000 word range. So I'm always writing. I'm always doing stuff. I literally hang out with my kids and my wife, play video games, write, paint, take a nap, go for a walk. That's my day.
But not Lovecraftian video games, right?
Well, every time I play them, they're so fun. I play them, but I'm always going into them kind of like, oh crap, this is gonna suck, and they do. I mean, they're probably fine as just a normal video game. It's just when they're like the first licensed Lovecraft video game, which is dumb in and of itself, considering Lovecraft's all public domain. And then you sit down and play, you're like, what the hell is this? Why do I have a flamethrower? Like, you know?
Well, Dennis, we're going to start wrapping things up. Thank you so much for being here and joining us for this interview.
Sure.
It was fantastic.
No, it's been great.
Any last things that you want to mention?
Yeah, so starting tomorrow, in the bundle of holding, there are going to be 2 Delta Green bundles going up. You guys know what the bundle of holding is, right?
That's drive-through, right?
Yeah, so Alan Varney runs this really cool, almost charity that, a chunk of the whatever's raised goes to this charity. And we're giving our charity portion to Human Rights Watch. But it collects a bunch of PDFs into kind of a decent price, like it really lowers the price. So if you're really interested in getting into Delta Green, this is going to be a great opportunity to get all the PDFs much cheaper. And it'll be available starting tomorrow, and I'll send you guys the link so you can put it in the notes.
How long is that going to be available for, Dennis?
Until October 28th.
Okay.
So it'll run from the 8th to the 28th.
Very cool. And Dennis, if people want to find out more about you and Delta Green, where can they find that information?
Well, following me on Twitter is always really good. I'm drgonzo at 123, so Dr. Gonzo 123 on Twitter, and follow me there. And you want to ask me questions or poke around, usually there's an answer there. And I talk about art and design and living the weird artist life way out on an island in the middle of nowhere. And if you find that kind of stuff interesting, I have a fun time arguing with people on there. I really love Twitter. I'm like one of 4 people I know who like Twitter. Everybody else is like, it's constantly attacking me. And I'm like, it's an inert piece of technology. You can block anybody. It's really easy. So, come out there and give me a shout. Arcdream.com is always a good place to look at what we're up to right now. And our Facebook pages for Arc Dream and Delta Green RPG are also very popular.
Awesome. So coming next is the Labyrinth, right? That's the next release?
Yep. And we're really we also have several small scenarios coming out, so we're never stopping. We have a new short scenario for Delta Green called Ex Oblivion, which is really fun, fully illustrated, coming out in a little booklet. And then we have Shane's new scenario called Hourglass, which is coming out in a little booklet as well. So Labyrinth, those 2, and then Impossible Landscapes. And we also have an unannounced title, which I'll announce here. We're going to be collecting, just like we collected our scenario books into a hardcover for A Night at the Opera previously. We collected 4 or 5 scenario books and put them in there. We're going to be doing that again in a new book called Delta Green Black Sites.
Cool.
Which will collect all those.
That's awesome.
We'll put it in there, and I'm working on the cover right now for that.
Well, very cool, Dennis. Well, thanks for coming on to the show. We appreciate it.
Oh, no, thanks for having me.
And as always, this has been the Great Old Ones Gaming Podcast. I'm your host, Nate, lost in time and space.
I'm Man from Lang, host of the Whisper in Darkness YouTube channel.
I'm Innkeeper Vase Odin from the Twisted Tentacle Inn.
I'm Dennis Detwiller, some weird guy who does Lovecraftian stuff occasionally. Sorry, I have a really hard time taking myself seriously. I had a conversation with a lady yesterday where she's like, "What do you do for a living?" And I'm like, "Oh God, I can't." I just like walked away from her.